The cemetery lay on the far edge of town, where the prairie grass grew wild and the wind never stopped moving. That weather-worn headstones stood in uneven rows, their inscriptions faded by sun and years, but one grave stood apart. No stone, no marker, only a patch of earth framed by a few stubborn weeds. The townsfolk rarely passed that way, and when they did, their eyes slid past it quickly, as if afraid to linger. Yet each week, without fail, fresh wildflowers appeared on the bare mound. Sometimes yellow prairie blossoms, other times a small bundle of lavender tied with twine. No one claimed them, and no one explained their presence. Anna Morel, newly arrived in town to take up the post of schoolteacher, first noticed the grave on a quiet afternoon walk. Something about its isolation caught her attention, the way it seemed both forgotten and carefully tended. The rest of the cemetery carried names etched in stone, names tied to stories, but this one was only silence. She paused at the edge of the mound, the wind carrying the faint scent of the flowers. There was no clue to who rested beneath, no sign of when they had lived or died. Just the unmarked earth, standing in quiet defiance of time and memory. The mystery began there, in that lonely corner, with a grave that had no name. In the following days Anna began to notice how the townsfolk reacted whenever the nameless grave was mentioned. At the general store, a simple question about the cemetery brought an awkward pause, followed by a quick change of subject. At the post office, an older man tightened his jaw and muttered that some things were better left alone. It wasn't anger she saw in their faces, but unease, like the subject touched an old wound best kept hidden. Stories in a town like this usually flowed freely, yet on this matter, there was only a guarded silence. Even the oldest residents, those who had lived through decades of change, claimed they didn't recall who was buried there. Some pretended to think hard before shrugging, others would busy themselves with some small task, avoiding her gaze entirely. The more resistance she met, the clearer it became that the grave story was not forgotten, it was being kept. The flowers, the secrecy, the avoidance, each piece hinted at something buried deeper than the coffin itself. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Redford, someone knew exactly why that grave had no name. One cold afternoon, Anna made her way to the far edge of town, where the old cemetery keeper, Samuel Reed, lived in a weathered cabin beside the iron gates. Samuel was a man of few words, his face lined by years of sun and wind, his eyes sharp yet weary. At first, he listened without much expression as she asked about the grave. His silence lingered long enough to make the air feel heavy. Then, with a reluctant breath, he admitted he had been working the grounds when the burial took place decades ago. According to Samuel, the grave was unlike any other he had seen in his long years. No headstone was ever placed, only the simple wooden cross that now leaned with age. The funeral had been small, attended by only a handful of people dressed in plain black. They had arrived quietly, without a preacher, and left just as quickly, speaking little to one another. Samuel said the coffin had been sealed shut before it even reached the cemetery. He had been paid well to dig the grave and told not to ask questions. No name was given, no date, only instructions to keep the burial discreet. Before she left, Samuel's voice dropped low, and he warned her that digging into the past of that grave could stir up things the town had worked hard to bury, not just in the ground, but in memory. Anna spent the following days inside the dusty records room of the old town hall. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and fading ink, and the tall shelves groaned under the weight of decades-old ledgers. She began her search with cemetery maps, comparing burial plots to official death records. Page after page revealed familiar names tied to dates and causes of death, but when she reached the plot number of the nameless grave, the entry was blank. The space where a name should have been was nothing more than a faint dash, as though someone had deliberately erased it. Digging deeper, she found an old ledger of property deeds and legal disputes. Hidden between unrelated cases, one fragile page caught her eye. A faded police report from the same year as the burial. Most of the text had been smudged over time, but a single note remained clear: victim's identity to remain undisclosed by court order. Further investigation revealed that several town officials from that era had all resigned within months of the burial, their departures unexplained. A faint pattern began to take shape in Anna's mind, one that hinted at a cover-up reaching far beyond a simple unmarked grave. Each discovery tightened the knot of mystery, leaving her with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that someone had worked hard to erase a life from the town's history. Armed with the fragments of evidence she had collected, Anna returned to the cemetery under the pale light of dawn. The ground around the nameless grave was soft from recent rain, and the earth seemed to hold its breath as she worked. Beneath the surface, her careful digging uncovered a small, rusted metal box. Inside, Wrapped in brittle cloth were personal belongings: a silver locket with a faded photograph inside, a torn letter stained with age, and a badge that had long since lost its shine. The name engraved on the badge matched a man who had disappeared from town records exactly 27 years earlier. The letter, though partly ruined, revealed a desperate plea for help and hinted at a betrayal by someone in power. It became clear that the man had been silenced to protect the reputation of influential figures. His grave left without a name to ensure he would be forgotten. With the truth in her hands, Anna documented everything and sent copies of her findings to regional authorities and historical archives. The town could no longer pretend the grave was just an oddity; it was a silent testimony to a crime long buried. Though the man's story had ended in injustice, Anna felt a quiet victory in giving him back his name. The wind through the cemetery's trees seemed to carry a whisper of gratitude, as if the dead themselves were finally at peace.